Here's how I made this cinematic render in Blender, GAEA and Davinci Resolve. Alright, cut the scary music, I just wanted a cool intro. I always begin by blocking out the scene by using basic shapes, so instead of making complex models from the get-go, I always make a rough version so I can quickly move things around. The goal here is just to try and get a feel for the composition. So I made this awesome terrain in GAEA, which is an awesome node-based terrain generation software. Then I just made a rough tent shape and placed the camera somewhere that looked good. Nice. Okay, so now that I like the composition for the shot, I can increase the detail in my scene. So to make the tent, I added a plane and I projected it onto the floor. Then I extruded it up and I made the tent shape. Because I'm simulating it, it needs plenty of geometry to work with, so I added more loop cuts. Then I used proportional editing and moved the flaps so that they catch the wind when we add that later. Lastly, I added a solidify modifier and a subdivision surface modifier, just to make it a bit smoother and thicker. For the texture, I just used a fabric material that I have saved, and I combined that with a squash noise texture plugged into the roughness. This creates the illusion that there's streaks of rain on the sides. To simulate the tent, I used hooks on a cloth simulation. Hooks hold parts of the geometry in place, and anything that isn't hooked will be moved around by the cloth simulation. If I were to demonstrate how to do this, it would be another tutorial in itself, so here's another one you can watch. I'll link it in the description. I didn't want the parts of the cloth that had the hooks to be perfectly still because that would be unrealistic, so I added some noise to the location of the hook empties. Next I added some wind and turbulence, but I wasn't really getting the crazy thunderstorm feel that I was after, so I added some noise to the rotation of the wind. I was really happy with the result after I made these changes because the tent really looks like it's getting battered by the wind. The rope simulation was fairly easy, so I just made the rope, which was made using a displacement modifier set to magic on a stretched out subdivided cube. Then I made a cube the length of the rope and subdivided it. Now here's where the magic happens. I added a surface deform modifier to the rope, targeting the new mesh I made. Then I just orientated the ropes correctly. Then I added a cloth simulation to the new lower poly mesh and obviously added hooks so it didn't just fly off when we simulate it. So instead of using the dense, high poly mesh for the simulation that would have taken Blender a decade to bake and probably exploded my PC, I just used the lower poly version to drive the simulation. By the way, if you want to learn how to make stuff like this yourself, I run an animation course with weekly Q&As. I'll personally help you work through any Blender related problems you run into. There are also monthly challenges with awesome prizes, a community of other artists, and a crash course if you're starting Blender from scratch. Links in the description or the pinned comment. To add vegetation, it's important to know which plants to include, so I just went online and looked at some different biomes, and I loved the plants in this reference image, so I just went on my asset library and found plants that looked similar. Then I used geoscatter to scatter the plants. I added some assets manually, and I added the tree in the foreground to break up the depth and make the shot feel framed, as if the view was hidden away. To simulate the wind, I got quite lucky because geoscatter has a built-in wind feature which I used. For the rain, I added a plane with a particle system, and it drops thousands of these tiny icospheres with a glass material. Then I just enabled motion blur in my render settings so they look like streaks in the final thing, rather than lots of jittery dots. For the background, I just added a PNG of a mountainscape, and because it's a night scene, only the silhouette matters. I also added a PNG of the moon behind the mountain, then plugged the base color into the emission color and gave it some strength. The lighting was super important in this render because I wanted the viewer to feel hidden away, as if they're in the bushes looking at the tent. So I made the midground light but the foreground and background dark. For the midground light, I mainly used a gobo over the tent. A gobo is a light with a pattern overlaid on top of it so that you get realistic broken up light, instead of just perfect clean light. Other than that, I used a few other lights just to add some highlights here and there, just like the one on the tree, which nicely shows the tree's silhouette. I also used one behind the tent to make it look like it's reflecting the moon. I really didn't want some lights affecting other parts of our scene, and that's where light linking came in super handy. Light linking allows you to set up lights that only illuminate specific objects in the scene. To set up light linking, select the object that you want to have the isolated light, then shift select the light source itself. In the Object Properties tab, scroll down to Shading and you'll find light linking here. Then press Add New and then press the Add button. And boom, it's isolated your object with the light. Lastly, I added some storytelling elements. So I added this tree stump with some boots on it, and I also added a camping rucksack leaning against it. I also added some volumetrics just to give it a bit more atmosphere. Okay, so that's pretty much it for what I did in Blender, but lastly I rendered it out in the EXR format. This is amazing because it has a far higher dynamic range than your bog standard PNGs, so you can really push the exposure. Then I graded the animation. So firstly I adjusted the colours, then I desaturated the plants on the left as they were distracting from the main subject. Then as always, I added vignette to darken the border of the render, and I added some animated noise in front of the moon to make the cloud movement. Then I just grabbed some sound effects from my sound library. I got some wind, some ambience, and some rain sounds. And here's the final result. I absolutely love this render. I really wanted to put my all into a project, and that's exactly why I made this. Also, this is my first time doing a long form breakdown, so if you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing and liking. I'd really appreciate that. If you want to learn how to make awesome stuff like this in Blender, then check out the pinned comment or the description. Thanks for watching.